Hello everyone, welcome to another Flesh and Blood video. In this one, we'll be taking a look at Enigma, but a little bit different to what you're used to seeing, because this one is, instead of using Cosmo, going to be using Iris of Reality. This is not a hybrid list. I believe there was a hybrid list floating around at one of the nationals, but this is not that. This is a pure Iris list, a bit more basic for anyone who wants to be playing this over Cosmo. So, with all that, let's get straight away with the explanation. Let's start with Iris itself. Iris is a illusionist weapon. It is a two-handed orb. It has the effect during your action phase, your illusionist auras you control are weapons with 4 power, and once per turn you can pay 3 resources to attack and have go again. So pretty much you pitch a blue, you swing for 4, you get go again. This is pretty strong in Enigma, considering that Enigma can turn your spectral shields into 5 because you get the +1 counter, and also makes your first shield attack free, which is pretty nice with some of the, or first shield attack costs 1 less. Sorry. So you can attack for 2, which lets you easily play something like a Miraging or a Levels, some of the other cards we have in this deck, and just let you fit around some other 1-cost cards that you do generally want to be playing. For the rest of our equipment, we of course have Traverse the Universe, since tutoring up a blue, even if you just pitch it to attack, is pretty nice. Gives this sort of a 4 or 5 value as a helmet. Tunic, because we do play a fair amount of 1s, and also with Tunic up we can use the 1 extra resource and our Tunic to play a 2 after we swing with the shield. Waves of Reality is here because we aren't on the most auras that we can put a counter on. So this just giving us a shield out of the gate if our opponent decides to hit us turn 1. If we can protect that shield, we can have a 4 attack coming in straight away, and it is just 2 extra health. And then we're on Meridian Pathway, mainly because we have a lot of auras that don't actually have go again, a lot of the free auras in this deck. So the Meridian Pathway giving our auras instant are really actually important. So we do end up using this effect a lot. And then looking at some of our sideboard equipment, we're just on 3 Arcane Barrier. Crown of Reflection, since our helmet doesn't block versus Wizard. Northern Glove will come in versus our Runeblade matchups because Waves of Reality just gets blown out entirely by Rune Chance. And the Norrin Robe is here because we want the Meridian Pathway Ward 3 versus Kano. This deck actually has a little bit better of a matchup into Kano. Yes, Kano can try to pitch stack us, but they can't ping us down since they can't kill some of our auras, mainly our Spectra ones. So having 3 AB plus the Meridian Pathways to protect their combo turn if they're trying to pitch stack us is pretty nice. And they're actually at threat of damage, so we might even be able to kill them faster than normal Enigma lists can. Moving on to the main board. First, let's talk about some of our auras, since that's the main point of the deck. Of course, we're still on Shimmers of Steel and Haze Bending. Those are the 2 main auras that you'll see in a lot of other Enigma lists, so we won't go over them too in depth. Just Shimmers is really good because it gives your auras more damage. Really good to stack up versus some decks that don't really want to clear your auras. And Haze Bending gives you some extra shields that you can swing with or use for HP. Passing Mirage is the other Spectral aura we're playing, and we're playing it only at a 2 of. In testing, this card did feel a little off since we don't have the most attacks with Phantasm in our deck, but the ones that we do really care about this. Of course, we want our opponent to pop our Miraging Metamorphs, which is why Passing Mirage isn't included in the deck in normal Enigma lists. But since we're on Spears of Serality and Phantom Tidemaw is a lot better in this list than it is in Cosmo. We really care about the Passing Mirage, so we can protect those 2 cards. And then we are on 2 Phantom Tidemaw, since it can be a little clunky in this type of list, but gets a lot of value if we can keep it around, especially since it has a pretty high base, letting this come in for a massive number whenever we attack with it. We do have Restless Coalescence in this deck because it can give us a few extra shields. Yes, its actual ward doesn't matter all too much, and it's not very aggressive normally, but we can play this to end a chain and then come in for a pretty high amount. We can still move all of the counters to it. Just it's not going to be as defensive as a tool as it would be if we were on Cosmo, since we can't play it as flexibly and swing for it for cheap like you can in Cosmo. But it's still a very good card I think you should be including in this deck, because you do get the pressure of making shields mainly, allowing you to keep a shield around more often, letting you come in with a shield plus something else for 4 plus a hit effect or a 1-cost attack. Now that that's all of the auras, let's take a look at our instant package, because of course we are playing a Mystic Hero. We need some instants. Oh, I'm sorry, I did miss one aura. Vengeful Apparition. This one's actually really important. We're only on the blue of Vengeful Apparition, but this card is extremely good in this type of deck. It's a blue 0 cost, block 3, which is really nice, and it only has ward 1. But it has the effect that when it leaves the arena, if you control no other illusionist auras, you can play your next aura with cost 0 this turn as though it were an instant, and if you do, it enters play with a +1 counter. This is actually really important because this card enables you to play your Spectra auras on your opponent's turn after they don't have an attack or an action point left to clear it, which means you can easily get down a Hazebending or a Passing Mirage or a Shimmers of Silver without the fear of it getting automatically cleared. So Vengeful Apparition is actually a really important card in this deck, since not only is it a 0-cost aura that we can play off of Meridian Pathways pretty easily, and it blocks well since it blocks 3, it's a super important card to get us advantage with our other auras. Now, let's talk about the instants. This deck is only playing 6 of the Mystic instants, 6 of the Transcend instants, because we don't need Chi as much. We're not on Manifestations of Mirai because that wouldn't really help us all too much, since, yeah, we can still swing with it for 8, but it costs 1 in Cosmo, where it costs 3 here, so we're pitching 6 to swing for 8, which is pretty bad. And yes, we could play it as a 6 for 6, but it really doesn't seem worth it to me. I'd rather focus on more defense or setting up some of our illusionist aura or other free auras, since they get more value. So we needed less Chi, and because we don't need to play as much Chi, I've decided to just play the non-targeting Chi, since the ones that need a target attacks can feel a little clunky sometimes. So those ones are Homage to Ancestors, Stir the Pot, Rising Sun, Setting Moon, Passover, and Preserve Tradition, as well as the Mystic Illusionist instant, Sacred Art, Immortal Lunar Shrine. Some of these are just here because they're pretty basic. Stir the Pot, Homage, Rising Sun are pretty basic. Sacred Art doesn't help us a lot of the time since the +1 counters isn't as important, but if we can get it off really early, we can get 2 shields with counters. So say we can transcend this on our opponent's turn going first, we just kind of raise our win rate by an absolute ton. So this card I think is pretty necessary. And if we do have a Restless Coalescence, it can help too. Even when we don't, it can still just be, I guess, 6 cost 10. If we've played a blue, we can pitch 3 into this and then get the Chi back. So it's kind of free, I guess, if we pitch it to one of the shields. So we can get some pretty good aggression out of it. And even if not, it's just a 3-cost Transcend, which you don't mind because of your helmet choice. But Passover and Preserved Tradition are actually pretty important. Since Zen is a pretty important deck right now, you need Passover and Preserved Tradition to sort of interact with them. Passover can mess up a bonds, or it can deny their Preserved Tradition, and then Preserved Tradition can sometimes deny their Passover if you don't have a card in your graveyard that can't be preserved. So if they pass over, they can only target actions like a levels, a haze bending, or this rounds on me, stuff like that. You can preserve it to the bottom to deny their passover, which means they don't get the transcend because you can't play with no targets, it'll just fizzle, which is really nice. And then same thing, vice versa. If they play a preserved tradition on one of their things, you can pass over it, make them not get the card back, and then fizzle the spell. So these two are a little more important for the meta, and they are pretty easy to transcend compared to the other ones. Looking at some of the rest of the blues inside of our deck, this rounds on me is to help deal with some aggro, as well as drawing a card really isn't bad. It's a 1-cost card, which means it fits very nicely with our shields, and the card drawn could be a blue, which will let us swing with another aura. Warmonger's Diplomacy does stop some of the cards in this deck since we're unable to play actions on our next turn. Of course, we can still instant speed them in on our opponent's turn. But even then, we'll mainly be attacking with our auras on our turn, and some of our auras are instants, and we're still able to actually play those since Warmongers only limits the actions you can perform. Unravel Aggression is the main card we'll be using our Traverse Universe for, being able to tutor up a Chi and then make the Unravel Aggression pretty much a free 5-block draw card, which is really nice. So I guess that's why it would be free, because we're drawing the card, but still, free interaction at 5-block is very nice. Hold the Line is another defensive option. It's just not in the sideboard because it's still a blue that's still pretty useful. We do have a blue for interaction in the sideboard, but that one only comes in versus certain matchups, or this one will stay in versus most matchups. And then we did already talk about Spears, but we'll talk about that when I talk about the reds more. Levels of Enlightenment is the last blue in the deck because it can be very flexible with Iris since we're going to be pitching a lot of blues. So we can pretty easily make this all 3 modes. And then a card draw could be nice to swing with an extra aura or just save an arsenal. And a 1 for 5 go again is pretty good. Moving on to this top row here, the rest of the deck we'll run through real quick. Fate Foreseen and Sink Below are good defensive options. You should put these in this deck pretty much all the time because they are super good options. Of course, these will come out versus Kano, but we do have sideboard cards for that. 2 Dissolve Reality, just so we can interact with some arsenals a little more. It's just a pretty nice card. And then we have some attacks. Miraging Metamorph is something your opponent really can't pop because giving you extra of your Spectre Auras could be really deadly, especially if you can instant speed one in with Meridian Pathways and then clone that. Command and Conquer is just really good arsenal interruption. It's great disruption to deal with a lot of the decks that want to set up on you, so this card will pretty much always be a mainstay. Battlefront Bastion is just a good 3 for 7 that blocks pretty nicely. This one could get cut for something else, but I do like it. If you wanted, you could play Censor in this slot, and I tried Enlightened Strike in this list, but Enlightened Strike did feel a little off. So if you like it, you can go for it, but I just prefer this over the other options. Although, again, Censor is a great option if you did have Censors and you wanted to play Censors. Since it is a 1 for 5, it can come in after a shield and then disrupt your opponent. And then finally, we're on 3 red and 3 blue Spears of Surreality. This is because it's just a good 1-cost go-again attack that comes in for decent numbers. Mainly the red being a 1 for 5 is pretty nice. If your opponent pops it, it can hurt because it does stop your turn, but if you have a turn where you say have a shield, Spears, and like a Phantom Tidemaw and 2 blues, you could come in with the shield, come in with the Spears, and then instant speed in the Phantom Tidemaw after, and then come in with that. Or if you have like a Restless Coalescence instead, that could be pretty nice. So Spears is a very flexible card, and even the blue. It's a blue block 3. It's still an attack we can play if our opponent doesn't have a popper, so it's still a pretty nice attack to be in the deck. Finally, let's go over the sideboard. We have 4 cards in it. Deep Blue Mist is going to come in versus our aggro decks. We are on 3 copies, although I don't know if 3 copies is the number that you actually need. This is a great card to play off of our Tunic, so pretty nice tool there. It's just extra copies of this rounds on me, kinda. Just our opponent won't draw the card, which can sometimes hurt you versus Zen, but other times it's perfectly fine. Deep Blue Mist is just some more damage negation for that matchup. Almost specifically, you could also consider this versus Bai and Katsu, but they're just in a pretty bad spot right now that you probably won't see them as often. Oasis Respite and Waning Vengeance are going to be the cards that are going to come in versus our Kano matchup. Oasis Respite is a good defensive tool that we can pay for with Tunic or use our Arcane Barrier for. And then Waning Vengeance is a kind of 1-for-4 block. If we pitched a blue, we can make a shield when this leaves the arena. Of course, versus Kano, and we try to attack with this or a shield, they do blow it up. Versus Kano, you want to try to prioritize your Spectra Auras since they can't get blown up unless your opponent throws like their Nourishing into it. So don't try to swing with the Waning Vengeance or the shields as much in that matchup. But Waning Vengeance is still a great defensive tool for that, since this can cover a full 5 with a blue, having 2 AB in this ward 3, and then we get the shield after for an extra 1 prevention. And then finally, the Weakest Link is going to be a card very good, again, versus our Zen matchup, versus our KO matchup. The aggro decks that kind of beat you, since you are a slower setup-based deck, the Weakest Link is a very good tool into allowing you to discard some of their tools and then replace this with a draw. So pretty nice tool to have in your sideboard for those aggro decks. This whole sideboard is pretty much set up to beat those aggro decks. Versus slower decks like Guardian, if they don't go on a fast plan, you can just kind of run them down with Passing Mirage, Phantom Tide Moth. You can protect it, plus good attacks and setting up a few auras each turn. And then you can even say bring in the Weakest Link versus that matchup if you wanted to just have another attack you can throw at them. So the slower decks really aren't too much to fear. And then the mid-range decks will try to block you out pretty early, but I think then they'll realize that they can't do that as much and they'll just try to aggro you down. But at that point, you have a board set up that they can't clear all too fast, and then you'll just run them over with shields and attacks that they can't deal with. But with all that, that's going to be the end of the video. I don't know how fast this one was. I felt like I talked pretty fast, so maybe this one will be under 15 minutes. But I'll have to see when I go and edit it. But I think this list is a pretty fun one. I had a lot of fun when I was testing it, so you might want to consider this one for your next armory. I don't know if this list is going to be one to win at any big events. I think a hybrid list might be one to do so. So if you wanted to figure out a good hybrid list for Iris and Cosmo together, because I think Iris is actually pretty good versus Zen. Since Zen doesn't want to take the time to clear your Spectra Auras, they can just be damage coming in every turn, and eventually with enough disruption you can slow them down to where you get the to a point where they have the block, and then at that point you just, make them block with their whole hand every turn, and then you just kill them. So I think Iris is really good at doing that, which is why I think a hybrid list is probably pretty good, and then the Cosmo lists are just better into Guardians, so even though I think Iris can play into Guardian and those type of other slower decks, it would be a little more advantageous to be able to have a Cosmo plan. Some cards that I would consider, if you wanted to, you could play Manifestations of Mirogai. It's good into those late game matchups because you'll have the resources to pay into it, but otherwise I kind of just wouldn't. And then again, Censor over the Battlefront Bastion is an option that you could go for. But with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm not sure what we're going to do for next week's. I'm kind of waiting on the banned and restricted announcement that I believe is in 1 week's time from date of recording. So maybe we do get it by next week's video, and I can make a new ninja list if they don't ban bonds, which I was going to make a Zen list for the standard Zen that isn't the full bonds, which still plays blue bonds, and some people think they're going to ban blue and yellow. I think they're going to ban shoes, if anything, which I don't know if they will ban anything, but we'll have to see. So I'm still a little reluctant on making a Zen video, at least for next week, since even if the shoes get banned, I'll have to change the deck list a little bit. Even if it's just a swap of strides to pouncing paws, I do need to look at it again if something does get touched. So if I don't have a deck ready in time, I'm sure I'll find something to show you guys that isn't ninja. But with all that, again, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.